They laughed at me when I told them I'd taken a cashier job at a grocery store. Not a polite, uncomfortable laugh, the kind that comes from pity. No. It was cruel. Mocking. Like my existence had turned into the family's inside joke. Linda, you really went to college to scan barcodes, my brother snorted across the dinner table, swirling his imported wine. Mom tried to hush him, but even she couldn't hide the smirk pulling at the corner of her mouth. Dad just sighed, that disappointed kind of sigh that tells you you're an embarrassment to your own bloodline. That night, I drove home in silence. My knuckles white on the steering wheel. The laughter still ringing in my ears. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of dust and broken dreams. Rent overdue. Bills stacked like Jenga blocks. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I felt this spark. A burning ember of something they didn't have, hunger. You see, my family wasn't rich, but they liked pretending they were. Dad was a mid-level executive at a company called Hartley Manufacturing. My brother had just landed a job there too, and my mom spent her days in country clubs bragging about the family business. And me. The black sheep. The disappointment. The $12 an hour cashier who couldn't make it work. What they didn't know, what they never cared to ask, was that the grocery store job wasn't my failure. It was my education. Because while they were busy sipping wine and gossiping about stocks they didn't understand, I was studying every broken system in that store. Every inefficiency, every lazy vendor, every outdated product line. And in those late nights, while my co-workers scrolled through TikTok on their breaks, I sat in the break room with my second-hand laptop, scribbling down ideas. Business models. Cost sheets. Profit margins. I didn't just scan barcodes, I scanned opportunity. One night, as I was restocking shelves in the cleaning supplies aisle, an older man, one of our suppliers, struck up a conversation. His name was Earl. He ran a small distribution company barely holding on because of corporate contracts. He told me something that would change my life. Kid, you're sharp. You ever think about owning something instead of working for someone? I laughed at the time. Me? Owning something? I couldn't even afford a car that didn't rattle. But that conversation planted a seed. A few months later, I took my entire savings, all $1,200 of it, and invested it into a tiny online wholesale business. It was messy, chaotic, and half the time, I didn't know what I was doing. But when you've been laughed at your whole life, failure stops being scary. Every night, after my shifts, I'd grind, researching supply chains, cold calling local stores, and convincing them to buy in bulk. Slowly, painfully, it started to work. One client turned into 3. 3 turned into 10. Then came the day I made my first $5,000 profit in a single week. That night, I looked at the family group chat. A new message popped up from my brother, a photo of his promotion party at Hartley Manufacturing. Champagne. Suits. Smiles. And below it, his text, "Don't worry, Linda. Maybe one day you'll catch up." I smiled. Not with bitterness this time. Because what he didn't know was that I'd just signed my first supplier contract with Hartley Manufacturing. And that was only the beginning. I grew up in a house where success was currency and love was conditional. If you brought home straight A's, you got smiles and praise. If you won awards, you got hugs and attention. But if you stumbled, if you dared to be ordinary, you became invisible. That's what I learned early on as the middle child of the Pierce family. My older brother, David, was the golden boy, the kind of son every parent bragged about. He was charismatic, top of his class, captain of the debate team, and somehow managed to make arrogance look like confidence. My younger sister, Chloe, was the prodigy, the one who played piano like she was born with music in her veins. Mom used to call her, my little Mozart. And me. I was the filler between their greatness. Average grades. Quiet. Always helping, never noticed. My parents never said it out loud, but I could feel it. That subtle disappointment that settled like fog in every conversation. Dad used to say, "Linda, you've got to push harder. No one remembers the ones who settle." But every time I pushed, every time I tried to prove myself, something went wrong. When I applied to business school, the scholarship fell through. When I tried to start a small art business online, the platform shut down before I made a sale. It felt like life had a personal grudge against me. By the time I graduated college, I was drowning in student debt. My family had moved on to bigger, shinier things, new houses, new cars, new bragging rights. And I was stuck trying to find a job that didn't make me feel useless. I'll never forget the day I told them I'd gotten the cashier job. We were all sitting at Sunday dinner, something Mom insisted on, mostly to show off how together we were as a family. I'd been nervous all day, rehearsing how I'd say it. So when I finally spoke up, I got a job at Green Mart. I actually expected a little happiness. Maybe a "that's great, honey," or even a nod. Instead, there was silence. Then David snorted. "You mean like, ringing up groceries?" I felt my stomach drop. "It's temporary," I said quickly. "I just need some experience." Experience? Mom interrupted with a scoff. "You spent 4 years in college for that kind of experience." Dad didn't even look at me. He just muttered, "We raised you better than this, Linda." I tried to laugh it off, but my throat felt tight. They changed the subject after that, moving on to Chloe's piano scholarship and David's promotion. I just sat there, pushing food around my plate, pretending I wasn't breaking inside. When I got home that night, I cried. Not the kind of soft crying people do in movies, I mean the ugly kind. The kind that makes your chest ache and your eyes burn. Because for the first time, I realized that no matter what I did, it would never be enough for them. But that pain, that humiliation, it became my fuel. I started saving every dollar I could. I cut out everything unnecessary, Netflix, takeout, even heat during winter. I worked overtime whenever possible, and every night, I researched business models and supply chain management. I didn't know what I was building toward yet, but I knew one thing for sure: if I couldn't earn their love, I'd earn their respect. Even if it killed me. Years later, when I saw that contract with Hartley Manufacturing, the company my father and brother worshipped, sitting in my inbox, I felt something shift inside me. A power I'd never felt before. This was my chance. Not just to succeed, but to make them see me. When I first started dealing with Hartley Manufacturing, I didn't even realize the irony of it. I just saw it as another supplier contract, another opportunity to grow my small business. But when I saw the letterhead and the company name, something in me froze. Hartley Manufacturing. My father's pride. My brother's employer. The reason they looked down on everyone else. They used to call it the family legacy. At every dinner, Dad would talk about our values, about how real success meant working for an established company, not playing pretend entrepreneur. He'd say things like, "A job gives you stability. Dreams just give you bills." So when I found myself reading an email from their purchasing department, asking for bulk supply quotes, addressed to me as CEO of my own small distribution company, I couldn't help but laugh. At first, I wanted to reject the deal. It felt personal. Too close. Too risky. But then I thought of every insult, every smirk, every time they made me feel like nothing. And something inside me whispered, take it. So I did. Hartley started small with me, a few low-tier product orders. Cleaning supplies, janitorial materials. Nothing glamorous. But I delivered fast. I undercut my competitors. And within 6 months, I was their most reliable supplier in 3 states. I didn't tell my family, of course. I knew they'd never believe it. In their eyes, I was still the cashier. During that time, I ran my business out of my apartment living room. Boxes everywhere, invoices stacked on the counter, my laptop screen glowing past midnight. It wasn't easy. I barely slept, and there were days when I had to choose between gas money and groceries. But I'd built something that was mine. Every order, every delivery, every check with my company's name on it, it felt like I was taking back a piece of myself. Meanwhile, my family's arrogance only grew. David got promoted again. Mom started introducing him at family gatherings as the future CEO of Hartley. Whenever I visited, they'd ask, "Still working at that grocery store, honey?" I didn't correct them. I just smiled and said, "Yeah, still working hard." Because in my head, I was already planning something much bigger. Something that would silence every laugh they ever threw my way. By year 2, my company was generating over $400,000 in annual revenue. I'd hired 2 employees, upgraded to a small warehouse, and expanded into multiple product lines. But the big break came when I received a call from Mr. Daniels, a senior executive at Hartley, ironically, the same man who used to mentor my father. He said, "Linda, your service and pricing have been exceptional. We're reviewing long-term vendor partnerships. I'd like to discuss a multi-year contract." I remember gripping the phone so tight, my hand shook. A multi-year contract meant stability. It meant recognition. It meant power. But most importantly, it meant leverage. When I went to their headquarters to finalize the deal, I wore a simple navy suit. Nothing flashy. But as I walked through the sleek glass doors, I could almost hear echoes of my father's voice in the hallways, bragging about his work family, his legacy. I took a deep breath and smiled. Because for the first time, I wasn't walking in as someone's daughter or sister. I was walking in as someone they depended on. The signing went smoothly. The executives were impressed by my efficiency, my understanding of supply dynamics, and my business model. I kept my last name off the paperwork intentionally. All contracts were under my company's name, L. Pierce Logistics. They never asked what the L stood for. When I got home that night, I poured myself a cheap glass of wine, the same kind my family used to mock, and raised it to the ceiling. To the Pierce family, I whispered. May they never see me coming. What I didn't know was that fate was about to give me the perfect opportunity to make them see me, and it would come in the form of my father's downfall. 6 months after signing the contract with Hartley Manufacturing, my life had changed completely. My little company, L. Pierce Logistics, wasn't little anymore. We were processing shipments worth hundreds of thousands of dollars each month. I'd built relationships with factories, negotiated distribution deals, and expanded into 3 states. I finally had an office, not fancy, but mine. Every box, every label, every product that moved through that space carried the weight of every insult I'd ever swallowed. And I was happy. Not because of the money, though I finally wasn't eating ramen every night, but because I'd finally built something that no one could take credit for except me. But life, as I'd learned, doesn't let peace last too long. It started with a phone call. I was reviewing a shipment invoice when my phone buzzed. The caller ID made me pause. Dad. He almost never called me. Usually, I was the one reaching out, trying to maintain some version of a relationship. So, seeing his name flash across my screen immediately sent a chill down my spine. I answered carefully. "Hey, Dad. Everything okay?" There was a pause, then his voice, lower than usual, almost heavy. "Linda, you still working that grocery job?" I blinked, confused. Not exactly." "Good," he said quickly. "Because I might need your help. My company's going through a rough patch." My heart stopped. Hartley Manufacturing. I hadn't heard anything about trouble. They'd just renewed my contract. "What kind of rough patch?" I asked. "Just supply issues. Inventory mismanagement. I can't discuss details, but it's serious. We're losing money. Your brother's department is in chaos." There was something almost desperate in his tone, a vulnerability I had never heard before. It was like hearing a god bleed. I offered to meet him for coffee. He agreed. When I saw him that weekend, sitting in a cheap diner instead of his usual country club haunt, I almost didn't recognize him. The confident posture was gone. His hair looked thinner, his suit wrinkled. "We had a vendor pull out suddenly," he said. "One of our biggest. Production's delayed, and we're scrambling to fill the gap." I sipped my coffee, trying not to smile. I already knew who that vendor was. I'd just signed them as my client 2 weeks earlier. They'd left Hartley because I offered better pricing and faster logistics. They didn't know Hartley was my family's company. "That's rough," I said softly. "I hope it works out." He nodded, rubbing his temples. "It'll pass. It always does. But if you hear of any reliable supply chains, let me know." The irony nearly made me laugh. My father, the man who once told me I'd never succeed without a real job, was now asking me for help with his supply chain. When I left the diner, I sat in my car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel. I could feel my heart pounding, half from adrenaline, half from guilt. Because even though I hadn't set out to hurt them, I wasn't about to stop success just because it made them uncomfortable. The next few months were chaos for Hartley Manufacturing. News articles started appearing about delays, layoffs, and cancelled contracts. David stopped posting his promotion selfies on social media. And Mom went quiet in the family group chat. No more pictures of country club brunches or designer handbags. For the first time in my life, they were struggling while I was rising. But the thing about success, it has a way of making you bold. And boldness can look a lot like revenge. One night, while reviewing my client reports, I noticed something interesting. Hartley was now looking for new vendors. Desperate ones. They'd sent open bidding requests to smaller companies. I stared at that email for a long time. My company fit the criteria perfectly. That night, I drafted a proposal under a slightly different business name, Pierce Distribution Solutions. Same owner. Same network. But a new logo, a different address. I hit send. 2 weeks later, I got an acceptance letter. Hartley had officially contracted me again. Only this time, they didn't know they were feeding their business lifeline directly into the hands of the daughter they'd mocked. And what happened next would turn that lifeline into their noose. When the new contract with Hartley Manufacturing was finalized, I should have been celebrating. It was my biggest deal yet, worth over $850,000 in long-term supply and distribution. For a small business like mine, that was massive. It meant expansion, hiring more people, and finally stepping into the financial stability I'd dreamed about for years. But I couldn't celebrate. Not yet. Because part of me couldn't stop thinking about who was on the other side of that deal, my own family. The day I received the first shipment request, I noticed something strange on the paperwork. The procurement manager listed for this contract was none other than David Pierce. My brother. For a second, I just stared at the screen, frozen. Of all the departments, of all the people, it had to be him. I debated backing out. It would have been easy. I could have claimed logistical issues, withdrawn quietly, and saved myself the emotional chaos that was sure to come. But then I remembered his laughter. That night at dinner, when he mocked my barcode dreams. And I remembered Dad's disappointed sigh. Mom's smirk. No. This was mine now. This was my battlefield. A week later, I got an email from D. Pierce Hartley Manufacturing. To Pierce Distribution Solutions subject. Urgent supply request adjustments. Please confirm delivery capacity for the updated inventory schedule by end of day. Regards, David Pierce Senior Procurement Manager *. I couldn't help but smirk at the irony. If only he knew he was talking to the same sister he once called a failure. I typed back, of course, Mr. Pierce. My team will ensure prompt delivery as always. Professional. Cold. Anonymous. Days turned into weeks. Shipments went smoothly. Payments came in on time. Hartley's production started to recover, thanks to me. But with every transaction, I felt a mix of pride and bitterness. Pride, because I was helping the company that once ignored me. Bitterness, because not a single one of them knew. Until one afternoon, fate decided to play its cruelest joke. I'd been invited to a local business networking event in downtown Chicago. I almost didn't go. I hated these things. But one of my newer clients insisted, saying it would be good exposure. The venue was elegant, filled with executives, suppliers, and investors. I was talking to a logistics partner when I heard a familiar voice behind me. I froze. Linda. Is that you? I turned slowly, and there he was. David. Perfectly dressed, holding a drink, smiling that same confident, smug smile. The smile of someone who always thought he was above me. I swallowed hard and forced a polite tone. David. Wow, it's been a while. Yeah, he said, giving me a quick once-over. Didn't expect to see you here. What brings you to a corporate event? There it was, the jab. The subtle dig. I smiled anyway. Oh, just networking. Trying to expand my business. Oh? Still doing grocery stuff. My jaw tightened, but I didn't let it show. Something like that. He laughed lightly, sipping his drink. Well, hey, maybe I can put in a word at Hartley. We're always looking for entry-level suppliers. If only he knew. He was already signing off on my invoices. I leaned forward slightly. You know, David, I appreciate that. But I think I'm doing all right. Yeah, he smirked. Making the big bucks. Enough to buy the company that signs your checks. He laughed, a genuine, loud laugh that turned a few heads. You always had a sense of humor. I didn't laugh. I just looked at him and said, quietly, yeah. I guess I did. That night, I drove home replaying every word, every smug glance. And I decided something. No more quiet victories. No more hiding behind new company names and contracts. If my family wanted to mock me for being small, I'd make sure the next time they saw me, I'd be standing tall enough to make them look up. What I didn't know then was that their downfall had already begun, and I was about to become the reason they lost everything. 2 months after that networking event, things started to spiral, not for me, but for them. Hartley Manufacturing was bleeding money. Quietly. Desperately. I saw it in their orders, in the way payments started coming a few days late, in how communication from their finance department got slower and more nervous. By then, my company had become one of their top 3 suppliers. That meant I saw everything, the late invoices, the internal confusion, the shifting leadership. And at the center of that chaos was my father. He'd been demoted quietly from vice president to consultant. David was still trying to hold things together in procurement, but even he couldn't hide the strain. Every week, I received emails filled with urgency. We need an extension. Can you prioritize our delivery this week? Our client is threatening to pull out if this shipment is delayed. I could have said no. I could have let them sink. But I didn't. Not yet. Because revenge, I was learning, isn't about destruction. It's about timing. One morning, I got a call from Earl, the same old supplier who'd once inspired me years ago. His voice was gruff, warm, and worried. "Linda, you keeping up with the industry news?" "Not lately." "Why?" "Hartley Manufacturing's in deep trouble. Rumors say they're about to lose a federal contract. Big one. If that happens, they're toast." My heart jumped, not in fear, but in realization. This was the moment I'd been unconsciously waiting for. If Hartley lost that contract, they'd be desperate. Vulnerable. And I had the capital and network to save them. Or buy them. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing around my apartment, my mind spinning between pride and guilt. What kind of daughter plots to take over her father's company? What kind of sister sees opportunity in her brother's downfall? I poured a glass of wine, staring out the window at the Chicago skyline. The lights shimmered like a promise. I remembered my father's words when I was 16, "You'll never make it in business, Linda. You don't have the edge." Maybe he was right back then. But I'd grown edges sharp enough to cut through steel. 2 weeks later, I attended a private industry auction, a place where struggling companies and investors quietly traded stakes in businesses behind closed doors. And there, in a dimly lit conference hall, I saw it. Hartley Manufacturing, minority share available, 23%. I froze. They were selling pieces of the company to cover debt. I sat through the presentation, heart pounding so loud I could barely hear the numbers. When the bidding opened, I kept quiet at first, letting others circle like vultures. But when the moment was right, I lifted my paddle. Once. Twice. "Sold, to bidder number 47, the auctioneer announced." My hands were shaking. Bidder number 47 was me. I'd just purchased 23% of Hartley Manufacturing, anonymously, through a holding firm. The same company that once told me I'd never be good enough, now partially belonged to me. Weeks went by. The tension in my family grew thicker. Mom called one evening, her voice trembling. "Linda, have you spoken to your father? He's been so distant lately. I think something's wrong." "No, I haven't," I said softly. "But I'm sure he's doing his best." "He always does," she said, her voice breaking slightly. It was strange, hearing worry instead of pride. Hearing fear instead of condescension. They'd built their identities around Hartley's success. And now, as it began to crumble, so did their arrogance. Meanwhile, I was in every board meeting, every vote, every investor discussion, through proxies and silent partnerships. And every decision I made tightened the noose around the company that had once defined them. Then came the call that changed everything. "Ms. Pierce, this is Mr. Daniels from Hartley. We've identified your company as one of our largest creditors. We're hoping you might consider a full acquisition partnership before we go into restructuring." My heart stopped. They were offering me a chance to buy the company. It was surreal. The same empire that mocked my existence was now asking me to save it. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the skyline again, this time smiling. The sweet taste of power had never been so intoxicating. But what I didn't realize then was that this move, this single choice, would expose everything. My secret. My name. My revenge. And when my family found out who was behind it all, their reactions would destroy whatever was left of the word family. I knew it couldn't stay hidden forever. Secrets that powerful never do. But I wasn't prepared for how it would unfold, or how much it would hurt, even after everything they'd done to me. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was in a meeting with my attorney, finalizing the acquisition terms. The deal had moved fast, faster than anyone predicted. Hartley's board was desperate. My holding company had just enough leverage to buy controlling interest. In less than 48 hours, I'd own the company my father built his entire identity around. We were reviewing documents when my assistant, Mia, rushed in looking pale. "Linda, there's a call for you. From Hartley's corporate office. They said it's urgent." I answered, expecting a procedural update. Instead, I heard my brother's voice. Cold. Sharp. "Linda. David. You've got to be kidding me," he said, his tone laced with disbelief and fury. Pierce Logistics. Pierce Distribution Solutions. You?" My blood turned to ice. He knew. "How?" "We traced the acquisitions," he snapped. "Dad's been tearing apart investor lists for days trying to figure out who was behind this anonymous buyer. Imagine our surprise when we realized it was you." I took a slow breath, steadying my voice. "Then you already know I didn't take anything from you." "I earned it." "Earned it," he spat. "You manipulated us. You used fake company names to infiltrate our contracts. You let us drown while you climbed over us." The words hit like blows. I wanted to shout back, to remind him that they were the ones who mocked me, dismissed me, humiliated me. But my throat locked. Because hearing his anger, it wasn't just business. It was betrayal layered over betrayal. "David," I said quietly. "All I ever did was build something of my own. I didn't sabotage you. I just stopped needing your approval." There was a pause, then he laughed. Not the cocky, teasing kind. This one sounded broken. "Dad's going to lose everything, Linda. You're proud of that? You've finally proven your point." And then, click. He hung up. I just sat there, staring at the wall. It should have felt like victory. It didn't. That night, I drove to my parents' house. For the first time in years, I felt the same fear I used to feel as a kid walking into that house after bringing home a bad grade. Only this time, I wasn't the failure. Mom opened the door, her face pale, her eyes rimmed red. "Linda," she whispered. "How could you do this to your father?" Behind her, Dad stood in the doorway of his office, the same office filled with awards and plaques that once symbolized everything I wasn't. But now, even those looked hollow. He didn't shout. He didn't rage. He just looked at me like he was seeing a stranger. "Was it worth it?" he asked quietly. "Destroying your own family just to prove a point?" My voice trembled. "You destroyed me first. I just stopped letting you." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You think success erases betrayal? You think money replaces blood?" "No," I said. "But respect does. And you never gave me any until I earned it myself." The silence after that felt endless. Mom started crying softly. David came in from the kitchen, his jaw tight, refusing to look at me. "You're not family anymore," Dad said finally. "You're a business rival." And just like that, the little girl who spent her life chasing their approval, died inside me. I walked out of that house without looking back. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding, my eyes burning with tears I refused to let fall. The night air felt colder than I remembered, heavier. When I reached my car, my phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Daniels at Hartley. "Congratulations, Ms. Pierce. The board has approved your acquisition offer. You now hold 52% controlling interest in Hartley Manufacturing." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then, through the blur of tears, I whispered, "I own them now." But even as the words left my lips, I couldn't tell if I was celebrating or grieving. Because the truth was, I'd won. Completely. But the victory felt hollow. And that was when I realized, revenge doesn't always taste sweet. Sometimes, it burns going down. The morning after the deal closed, my inbox exploded. Articles, press releases, congratulations from investors, LinkedIn notifications piling up by the second. Former Hartley Logistics acquired by Rising Star CEO, Linda Pierce. $12 per hour worker to multimillionaire entrepreneur in 6 years. Everyone wanted a quote. Everyone wanted a story. But the people whose opinions mattered most, my family, wanted nothing to do with me. The calls from my mother stopped. David blocked my number. Even distant relatives, who used to ignore me now suddenly called to see how I was doing, pretending they hadn't laughed at me years ago. It was like being the main character in a movie where everyone wants a ticket, but no one remembers what they did in Act 1. The first day I walked into Hartley's headquarters as the owner, I thought I'd feel triumphant. The glass building shimmered in the morning sun, towering over downtown, the same building my father once showed me when I was 12. "See that," he'd said proudly. "That's what success looks like, Linda. You'll never understand that until you work for it." And now, there I was, standing under that same sign, but it read Pierce Industries. I paused before going in. The air was thick with disbelief. Every employee I passed looked like they were holding their breath. When I entered the boardroom, the senior staff stood. Some nodded politely. Others looked like they wanted to melt into their seats. The former CEO, my father's old right-hand man, Mr. Lawson, wouldn't even meet my eyes. He finally said stiffly, "Congratulations, Ms. Pierce. None of us expected this outcome." I smiled. Calm. Controlled. Neither did I. But sometimes the universe gives you what you deserve, whether you're ready for it or not. A few people shifted uncomfortably. Good. Let them feel it. But deep down, my hands were shaking. That night, I sat in my new office, my father's old office, staring at the skyline. His desk was still there, massive and heavy, carved oak. The smell of his cologne still faintly lingered. I found an old photo tucked inside one of the drawers, the four of us, Dad, Mom, David, and me. All smiles. All fake. I should have thrown it away. Instead, I put it back and closed the drawer softly. Because for all the power I'd gained, I couldn't erase the emptiness. 3 weeks later, at a business gala, I ran into someone I hadn't seen since my lowest point, Mr. Cooper, my first manager from the diner where I'd earned that embarrassing $12 an hour. He looked at me with genuine pride. "Linda Pierce," he said with a grin. "I read about you. Look at you, bossing billionaires around. Remember when you used to clean booths at 2 a.m.? I laughed softly. Yeah. Those booths taught me more about people than any boardroom. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. You know, success isn't revenge, kid. It's peace. Don't forget to find it. His words hit me harder than I expected. Because for the first time since signing that acquisition, I realized I hadn't found peace. I'd just found power. And they're not the same thing. The next day, I drove by my parents' house again. I didn't go in. Their cars were in the driveway, the porch light still flickering the same way it did when I was little. I sat there for 10 minutes, debating if I should knock. But I didn't. Because I knew what he'd say, "You got what you wanted, didn't you?" And maybe I did. But standing outside that house, I realized something terrifying. I'd spent so long proving I could rise above them, that I never asked myself if I wanted to live above them. Because the higher I climbed, the lonelier it got. And every victory came with a shadow of what it cost. Still, I couldn't let go. The part of me that once begged for approval now craved their remorse. And I wasn't done yet. Because the final step of my plan wasn't just owning their company. It was deciding what to do with it. And I had two options, destroy it, or save it, just to prove I could. I leaned back in the leather chair that once belonged to my father and whispered, "Let's see how it feels to play God." Power is a strange thing. It doesn't make you feel stronger, it makes you realize how weak you used to be. And sitting in that corner office, with the city skyline glowing outside and my family's empire under my name, I should have felt untouchable. But all I felt was empty. The boardroom had grown silent after the acquisition, but whispers spread like wildfire. Some employees were terrified. Others were bitter. And deep down, I could sense it. They didn't see me as their savior. They saw me as the executioner. They thought I'd destroy everything. And maybe I wanted to. For weeks, I reviewed financials, contracts, operations reports, searching for flaws, reasons to pull the plug, reasons to end what my father had built. Every late-night spreadsheet felt like a ghost of the past. Every old policy reminded me of the man who once said I'd never be a leader, just a liability. It would be poetic, I told myself, to dismantle his legacy the same way he dismantled my confidence. But then one afternoon, while walking through the production floor, I overheard two longtime employees talking near the loading dock. They didn't see me, they were too busy worrying. "If Pierce shuts us down, I don't know what I'll do," one said. "I've been here 20 years. My kids are in college." "Yeah," the other side. "It's not fair. We didn't mock her. We didn't do anything." Their words stopped me cold. Because they were right. They weren't the ones who hurt me. They were just caught in the crossfire of a war I didn't start, but refused to end. For the first time, I saw the truth. My revenge wasn't just against my father, it was against a ghost. And I'd been punishing everyone else for his sins. That night, I stayed in the office long after everyone had gone home. The city lights flickered through the glass like silent witnesses. In front of me were two letters. One was a dissolution order, ready to sell off the assets, liquidate the business, and bury the Hartley name forever. The other was a restructuring plan, one that would modernize the company, save jobs, and make it profitable again. Two futures. Two versions of me. The angry daughter, who wanted to burn everything that reminded her of rejection, and the woman who had finally learned what true strength meant, not revenge, but restraint. I picked up my pen, staring at the documents. The weight of the decision pressed down like a mountain. And then, almost unconsciously, I whispered, "He took everything from me. But I won't take everything from them." I signed the restructuring plan. It wasn't forgiveness. It was liberation. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting. Half the executives came in expecting chaos, the other half, layoffs. Instead, I walked in calm, steady, and spoke clearly. Effective immediately, we're rebuilding this company from the ground up. New leadership, fair pay, and innovation. If anyone wants to leave, go. But if you stay, you're part of something new. The room was silent for a moment. Then, applause. Not thunderous, but real. I walked out of that boardroom feeling something I hadn't felt in years, peace. But peace doesn't last forever. Because later that night, as I left the office, I saw a car parked across the street. Black, familiar. When I stepped closer, the window rolled down. My father. His eyes met mine, cold as ever. You think saving the company makes you better than me, he said softly. You think they'll ever see you as one of them? I didn't answer. I just looked him in the eye and said, no. But they'll never see me as your shadow again. He smiled faintly, not kindly, not cruelly. Just, resigned. You've changed, Linda. No, I said. I finally stopped changing for you. He drove off without another word, disappearing into the dark. And I stood there, watching the taillights fade, realizing that the war was finally over. But victory never looks like you imagined. I went home that night and sat alone on my balcony, sipping tea instead of champagne. The city below was alive, buzzing, but I finally felt quiet inside. No more proving. No more chasing. No more revenge. Just peace. But as I stared at the skyline, one thought still haunted me. What if peace was just another kind of loneliness? For months, life felt, still, almost peaceful. Hartley, or rather, Pierce Industries, began to flourish under the new structure. Profits were climbing, employees seemed hopeful again, and investors were calling non-stop. Every headline painted me as the self-made woman who outsmarted the system. Business Insider, Forbes, even a segment on Good Morning America. From $12 an hour to $2.3 million power move, Linda Pierce's redemption story. Everyone wanted a piece of the fairy tale. But behind the cameras, the awards, and the applause, I felt hollow. Because every time I looked at that company's new logo, I saw my father's face. Not angry. Just disappointed. One morning, I came into the office early, 5:30 a.m., before anyone else arrived. The building was silent, save for the low hum of the lights and the echo of my own footsteps. I walked past the row of photos hanging in the hallway, old black and white snapshots of Hartley's history. There was one of my father shaking hands with city officials during a ribbon-cutting ceremony. He looked proud, unstoppable. That same pride I once wanted him to have for me. I stopped and stared at it for a long time. Then I took it off the wall. Not to destroy it, but to bring it to my office. I set it down on the shelf beside my desk, next to a framed photo of the diner where I started. Two worlds. Two versions of me. Maybe I didn't have to erase the past to own it. Maybe power wasn't about domination, it was about redefinition. Later that day, an unexpected visitor arrived. My mother. She looked older than I remembered, softer somehow, like time had finally worn down the sharp edges of her pride. I didn't know whether to hug her or hide. Mom? Can we talk? She said gently. We sat across from each other, the tension between us thick and trembling. Your father isn't well, she began quietly. The stress, it's taken a toll. I didn't mean to hurt him, I said. I know, she whispered. But you did. The words hit hard, not out of blame, but truth. He loved that company, Linda. It was everything to him. But he couldn't see you as separate from it. He didn't know how. I looked down at my hands, twisting the edge of my sleeve. He made me feel like I was nothing. He was wrong, she said. But so are you, if you believe revenge makes you something. There it was. The sentence I didn't know I'd been waiting to hear. She stood, glanced around the room, and smiled faintly. You did all this on your own. I hope one day you can forgive us. Then she turned to leave, but paused at the door. He still keeps your first business card in his wallet, you know. And with that, she was gone. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window, the city bathed in golden light. It hit me then, forgiveness wasn't about them deserving it. It was about me deserving peace. So I picked up the phone. I didn't call investors. I didn't call the media. I called my father. He didn't answer. But I left a message anyway. Dad, you were right. Success is hard. But you were wrong about me. I never wanted to destroy what you built. I just wanted to be part of it. I hope one day you can see that. I hung up before I lost my nerve. Weeks passed. And for the first time, my nights were quiet. No anger. No plotting. Just quiet. Then one day, a small package arrived at my office with no return label. Inside was a single photograph, the one I'd found years ago of our family, all smiles. But this time, written on the back, in my father's handwriting, were 5 words, proud of you. Always was. Tears fell before I could stop them. I pressed the photo to my chest and whispered, I'm sorry too. And in that moment, for the first time since I was that humiliated girl working for $12 an hour, I finally felt free. But freedom isn't the end of a story. It's the start of a new one. Because as I looked around my office, I realized something else. Revenge gave me success. But forgiveness, that gave me peace. And yet, deep down, one last chapter was still waiting. Something that would test just how much I'd really changed. A year passed. 12 months since the day I took over Hartley. 12 months since my family stopped speaking to me. 12 months since I learned that success doesn't heal old wounds. It just gives you the silence to finally hear them. In that time, I'd rebuilt everything. Pierce Industries was thriving. We'd modernized our systems, created new jobs, even launched a mentorship program for women in logistics, the kind of opportunity one wish I'd had. People respected me now. Some even admired me. But the strange thing about respect is, it never feels the way you think it will. It doesn't fill the holes left by people who should have loved you first. On a grey Sunday morning, I found myself standing outside my parents' house again. The same white porch. The same flickering light. Only this time, there was no fear in my chest. Just quiet resolve. I rang the doorbell. It took a minute, but the door finally opened. My father stood there. He looked smaller somehow, not weaker, just human. The man who once towered over every room now seemed like someone who'd finally set down a weight he'd carried too long. He didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. Then, slowly, he stepped aside and said, "Come in, Linda." We sat in the living room. No grand confrontation, no dramatic music. Just the sound of the old clock ticking on the mantel. He finally broke the silence. "You did what I never could," he said. "You built something that lasted." "So did you," I replied. "You just couldn't see that I wanted to help." He nodded, looking down at his hands. "I was hard on you because I thought it would make you strong. I didn't realize it would make you lonely." For the first time, I didn't feel anger. I just felt tired. "It did both," I said softly. "But maybe that's what made me who I am." He smiled faintly. "You know, your mother keeps telling me to retire. Says it's time to let go. Maybe she's right, I said, smiling back. Maybe, he whispered. But before I do, I'd like to see what you're building next. My heart caught in my throat. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was something, a crack in the wall between us. A few weeks later, I stood on stage at a business conference in New York, delivering a keynote about leadership. Thousands of people listened as I talked about failure, humility, and what it means to truly rebuild. I said, revenge might light your path, but it won't warm you when you get there. Only forgiveness can do that. The room went quiet. Somewhere in the audience, I saw my mother. And next to her, my father, clapping slowly, tears in his eyes. That was the moment I knew. I hadn't just rewritten my story. I'd broken the curse. Months later, as I left the office late one evening, I walked through the empty halls, the walls once filled with portraits of my father and his partners now replaced by photos of the new generation. Young engineers. Female managers. Dreamers. On the far end, in the last frame, was a picture of me standing in front of the company sign, smiling, not out of pride, but peace. As I turned off the lights, I whispered to the empty room, "We made it, Dad." The hum of the city below felt softer that night, like the world had finally exhaled. I drove home under the quiet glow of streetlights, my reflection flickering in the windshield. Not the scared girl who once counted tips at a diner. Not the vengeful woman who wanted the world to bow. Just Linda Pierce, the woman who fell, fought, forgave, and finally found herself. Because in the end, revenge made me rich. But forgiveness made me whole. And that's the story I never meant to write, the story of how I turned pain into purpose, hate into healing, and a $12 per hour job into a $2.3 million redemption. Would I do it all again? Maybe. But next time, I'd start by forgiving myself first.